The entire restaurant fell silent. With tears threatening to spill, Amara gripped her phone, her knuckles turning white against the fabric of her black waitress uniform. The voice on the other end, cold, bureaucratic, and utterly indifferent, had just shattered her world. The inheritance, her late parents' legacy, and her younger brother's entire future in Seoul would vanish into the hands of predatory relatives if she wasn't legally wed. She whispered a desperate truth, never intending for it to leave her lips. If I don't get married by tomorrow, I'll lose everything. The wealthy patrons sitting beneath the crystal chandeliers exchanged confused, judgmental glances. A few scoffed. It was a scene. A public disaster in Seoul's most exclusive fine dining establishment. Amara felt the stinging warmth of humiliation rise to her cheeks. She wanted the marble floor to swallow her whole. Then, a deep, commanding voice echoed across the luxurious room. "Marry me." Every single employee froze. A silver fork clattered loudly against a porcelain plate, but no one turned to look at the clumsy diner. Every eye in the room was fixed on the private, shadowed table at the back. Slowly rising from his seat was Kang Min-jae, the owner of the restaurant and one of Seoul's most feared, untouchable men, stepped into the light. He was a billionaire, wrapped in a bespoke black Italian suit, a man rumored to control half the city's underground network with a mere flick of his wrist. He was the definition of elegant danger, someone no ordinary citizen dared look in the eye. Yet his piercing dark eyes were locked entirely on her. Amara's breath hitched in her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs as Min-jae calmly buttoned his suit jacket, his expression an unreadable mask of absolute resolve. He didn't glance at the whispering crowd or the stunned managers. He walked toward her, each measured step echoing with absolute authority, until he stood just inches away. The faint scent of expensive cedarwood and cold rain enveloped her. He looked down at her trembling form, his gaze intense enough to stop the air in her lungs. He didn't offer pity. He didn't ask for explanations. Instead, he reached out, his long, manicured fingers gently but firmly, taking the phone from her shaking hand. He pressed the end call button without taking his eyes off her. "I said, marry me," Min-jae repeated, his voice smooth, low, and terrifyingly serious. "Your 24 hours start now." The heavy mahogany door of Min-jae's top-floor office shut, cutting off the suffocating whispers of the dining room. Amara stood just inside the threshold, her hands still trembling against her apron. The room smelled of old paper, rich leather, and the same intoxicating cedarwood scent that clung to him. Min-jae walked past her without a word, stepping behind a massive, sleek desk that overlooked the glittering Seoul skyline. He bypassed his leather chair and stood looking out at the city lights, loosening his silk tie by a fraction. "Sit, Amara," he said, his voice dropping to a low, private rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. She swallowed hard, moving forward to sit on the edge of the plush velvet chair opposite his desk. "Mr. Kang? I don't understand. Why would you do that out there? You don't even know me." Min-jae turned, his dark eyes arresting hers in the dim light. "I know enough. I know you work 14-hour shifts without complaint. I know your brother's visa is tied to an inheritance deadline that expires at midnight tomorrow, and I know you are desperate." Amara gasped softly. She had never spoken a word of her personal life to him. "I'm a businessman, Amara. I don't trade in charity," Min-jae continued, sliding a crisp white document across the desk. A heavy fountain pen rested beside it. "This is a contract, a mutually beneficial arrangement." She looked down at the bold letters, outlining a legal marriage. "What could a man like you possibly need from a waitress?" Min-jae leaned forward, resting his palms on the dark wood, his towering frame casting a shadow over her. My family's board of directors is forcing an arranged marriage with a rival syndicate's daughter to consolidate power I do not want them to have. A foreign wife, a student with no ties to the underground, disrupts their chessboard entirely. You become my shield against an unwanted alliance. Amara's eyes widened as the piece of the puzzle fell into place. And what do I get? Total financial security, complete legal immunity, and top-tier protection for your brother. By tomorrow morning, my lawyers will have transferred your parents' inheritance out of your relatives' reach, fully backed by the Kang name, he said smoothly. He tapped the paper. We stay married for 1 year. We maintain public appearances. We do not interfere in each other's private lives. And most importantly, we keep emotion out of it. Amara looked at the clock on his wall. It was 11:45 p.m. The ticking felt like a physical weight pressing against her chest. If she walked out, her brother would be ruined. If she signed, she was stepping into the shadow of a man feared by the entire city. She looked up, meeting his piercing, unwavering gaze. There was danger there, but there was also an unspoken promise of safety. Amara picked up the pen. With a steady hand, she signed her name beside his. The ink dried, and the clock struck midnight. The trap was set. The morning sun had barely pierced the Seoul smog when the heavy glass doors of the district courthouse slid shut behind them. It had taken less than 20 minutes. A few official stamps, 2 steady signatures, and a cold look from Min-jae that silenced the bewildered clerk who recognized his name. Just like that, the legal trajectory of Amara's life had altered completely. She was no longer Amara Okafor, a drowning student. She was the wife of Kang Min-jae. The transition into his world was instantaneous and dizzying. A sleek, armored black sedan whisked them away from the government building, cutting through the morning traffic with aggressive precision. Min-jae remained silent beside her, his long fingers swiftly typing on an encrypted phone, his mind already miles ahead. Amara stared down at the simple platinum band he had slipped onto her finger for appearance's sake, its unyielding weight a stark contrast to her fading reality. When the car finally descended into the private subterranean garage of an ultra-exclusive skyscraper in Hanam-dong, Amara felt the true scale of her new reality settle in. The elevator required both a biometric eye scan and a passcode from Min-jae before ascending silently to the penthouse suite. The doors opened directly into a sprawling sanctuary of marble, glass, and dark timber. The penthouse was hyper-luxurious, boasting panoramic views of the Han River that made the city look like a miniature toy. But beneath the architectural masterpiece lay an undeniable, suffocating truth. This place was a fortress. Amara stepped out onto the polished floors, her low heels clicking softly, only to freeze. Stationed at the perimeter of the living space were 3 men in impeccably tailored suits, their hands folded neatly in front of them. Their postures were rigid, their expressions completely blank, and the subtle bulges beneath their jackets spoke of hidden violence. "This is your new home," Min-jae said smoothly, walking past her to hand his cashmere overcoat to one of the stoic guards. "The staff has been vetted. The security perimeter is active 24 hours a day." Amara swallowed the lump in her throat, looking from the floor-to-ceiling windows to the armed men guarding the hallways. "Is all of this protection for me, or from your enemies?" Min-jae paused, turning his piercing dark eyes back to her. For a fraction of a second, the cold mask of the businessman slipped, revealing the dangerous authority of the man who ruled the underground. "Both, Amara. In my world, the two are exactly the same." By evening, the crisp white blouse and black vest of Amara's waitress uniform were gone, replaced by an ethereal emerald green silk gown that cascaded down her slim frame like liquid jewel. The dress, delivered by top-tier stylists who had swarmed her room hours prior, complemented her rich, deep brown skin perfectly. Her naturally thick curls were elegantly pinned up, leaving a few soft ringlets to frame her face. And her late mother's simple silver necklace was replaced by a breathtaking collar of diamonds that felt heavy against her collarbone. When she stepped into the penthouse living room, Min-jae was waiting. He wore a crisp white dress shirt and a charcoal silk tie beneath a flawless tuxedo. As his eyes fell upon her, the ruthless boss of Seoul's underworld visibly hesitated. His piercing gaze tracked from the elegant slope of her shoulders to the quiet, stubborn confidence in her eyes. For a split second, his breath caught. "You look extraordinary," he murmured, his voice lower than usual. He stepped forward, offering his arm. "Remember, tonight we are not business partners. We are entirely infatuated." The grand ballroom of the Schiller Hotel was a sea of Seoul's elite, corrupt politicians, tech billionaires, and the powerful shadowed figures who pulled the city's strings. As the grand double doors opened and the announcer spoke their names, a suffocating silence rippled through the crowd. Whispers erupted like a sudden storm. Who was she? Where did the untouchable Kang Min-jae find a woman capable of capturing his attention? Rival syndicate leaders stared with hard, calculating eyes, trying to decipher the sudden move. Amara felt the weight of 100 judgment calls, but she lifted her chin, her grace unyielding. She didn't falter. She smiled warmly at a passing diplomat, her innate kindness and emotional intelligence disarming the hostile glares. But what truly stunned the room was Min-jae. The man known for his icy restraint and absolute indifference was uncharacteristically attentive. His hand never left the small of Amara's back, a warm, protective anchor amid the sharks. When a powerful chairman tried to subtly insult Amara's background, Min-jae's eyes turned lethally cold, his voice dropping to a warning whisper that made the older man pale. Later, as a slow melody filled the ballroom, Min-jae pulled her onto the floor. He guided her seamlessly, his large hand spreading warmth through the silk of her dress. "They are looking for a weakness," Amara whispered, looking into his dark eyes. "Let them look," Min-jae replied, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that felt terrifyingly real. He leaned in closer, his lips brushing her ear. "They will only find that you are completely untouchable." The heavy scent of metallic blood and wet asphalt shattered the peaceful quiet of the penthouse. When Min-jae returned at 2 a.m, he stumbled slightly as he crossed the threshold, a hand clamped tightly against his left side. His charcoal silk tie was gone, his crisp white shirt torn and stained a horrific deep crimson. Amara, who had been unable to sleep, rushed into the foyer. Her breath caught in her throat. "Min-jae." "I'm fine," he rasped, his voice uncharacteristically strained, though his jaw remained rigidly set. "A disagreement over territory. Go back to bed, Amara." "You are bleeding through your clothes," she said, her quiet stubbornness overriding his command. She gently but firmly took his uninjured arm and guided him toward the master bathroom. Min-jae didn't argue further, his strength clearly waning. He sat heavily on the edge of the marble bathtub, while Amara fetched the medical kit she had located earlier. With steady hands fueled by adrenaline, she began unbuttoning his ruined shirt. As the fabric peeled away, she swallowed a gasp. His torso was a map of violent history, faded knife scars and old bullet grazes etched into his olive skin. But the fresh wound was a jagged, bleeding laceration along his ribs, courtesy of a rival's blade. "Hold this," she instructed softly, pressing a sterile gauze pad to the wound. Min-jae hissed through his teeth, his dark eyes locking onto hers. He watched her intently as she worked. There was no disgust in her expression, only an overwhelming, gentle resilience. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic, her fingers surprisingly warm and steady against his cold skin. "You aren't afraid," Min-jae observed, his voice a low, raspy murmur in the quiet room. "I've faced terrifying things too, Min-jae. Monsters just look different in the daylight," she whispered, thinking of the relatives who had tried to destroy her family. She leaned in closer to apply the bandages, her breath fanning across his bare chest. At her proximity, Min-jae's hand shot out, his large calloused fingers wrapping gently around her wrist. He didn't pull her away. He just held her there, mere inches from his face. The untouchable Mafia boss looked completely exposed, his dark eyes burning with a vulnerability he had spent a lifetime hiding. The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocatingly intimate. The no-emotion rule they had agreed upon suddenly felt like a fragile glass wall, cracking under the heat of their rapid breathing. "Amara," he breathed, his thumb tracing the soft skin of her wrist, his gaze dropping to her full lips. She didn't pull back. Instead, her heart hammered against her ribs, not out of fear of the dangerous man before her, but from the sudden, terrifying realization that she was no longer just playing a part. She was falling for him. The storm arrived not with a clash of weapons, but with the arrogant stride of Amara's uncle echoing through the sleek reception area of Kang Holdings. Amara stood rigid beside Min-jae's desk, her hands clenched into tight fists as Uncle Benson marched in, flanked by two aggressive legal advisors and a terrifyingly cold Korean man in a sharp grey suit. The grey-suited man carried the unmistakable, predatory aura of the underworld, a high-ranking lieutenant from the rival syndicate Min-jae had clashed with nights before. "You think you're clever, Amara?" Benson sneered, his voice dripping with condescension as he tossed a thick legal dossier onto the desk. "A sudden marriage to a wealthy local restaurant owner? The courts will see right through this sham. Your parents' estate belongs to the family elders, and we are contesting this fraudulent union." Amara took a step forward, her expressive dark eyes flashing with a fierce, protective fire. "The inheritance belongs to my brother, Uncle. You didn't care about my family when my parents died, and I won't let you rob my brother of his future." Before Benson could retaliate, the grey-suited syndicate lieutenant stepped into her space, his eyes narrowing maliciously. "The girl speaks boldly, but in Seoul, contracts can be nullified, and people can disappear." The temperature in the room plummeted to absolute zero. Min-jae slowly rose from his leather chair. The elegant businessman vanished, replaced entirely by the lethal, calculating head of the underground empire. He didn't raise his voice, but the low, gravelly timbre of his words made even the rival lieutenant stiffen. "Step back from my wife," Min-jae commanded, placing himself seamlessly in front of Amara. His broad shoulders completely shielded her from their view, a towering wall of absolute defense. "You bring a domestic dispute into my office, backed by a rival family that has been bleeding territory for months. You think you have found a weakness to exploit?" Min-jae leaned over the desk, his piercing dark eyes locking onto the rival lieutenant. "Let me make this perfectly clear. If any of you look at her again, if you breathe the same air as her, I will not just contest your legal claims. I will dismantle everything you own, block by block, life by life. The Kang name protects her now." The raw, unfiltered menace in Min-jae's voice sent Benson stumbling backward, his face draining of color. Recognizing the absolute authority of the man they had provoked, the rival lieutenant gripped Benson's arm, silently forcing a tactical retreat from the office. As the heavy doors slammed shut, Amara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She looked at Min-jae, her heart hammering violently. He turned to face her, his hands gently finding her shoulders to check for injuries. In his eyes, The cold Mafia boss was gone, replaced by a desperate, terrifyingly real worry. The lines of their contract had completely dissolved. He wasn't just defending an asset anymore. He was protecting his world. The ironclad gates of the Seoul International Academy gleamed under the afternoon sun as the armored sedan pulled up to the curb. Amara sat in the back seat, her gaze shifting from the prestigious campus to her 14-year-old brother, David, who was staring out the window with wide, disbelieving eyes. For months, David's life had been a fragile question mark, shadowed by the threat of visa cancellations and the malice of their relatives. Now he was holding an acceptance packet to the city's most secure and elite boarding school. "Everything is taken care of," Min-jae said smoothly from the front seat, turning his head slightly to address David. "Your legal guardianship has been officially transferred to Amara and myself. The school's security team answers directly to my firm. No one from your uncle's circle can touch you here." David looked at his sister, then at the imposing Korean man who had suddenly become his brother-in-law. "Thank you, sir. I'll study hard. Just focus on being a student," Min-jae replied, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Leave the rest to me." As David gathered his things and waved a bright, hopeful goodbye before heading toward the campus, Amara felt a profound ache chest. The suffocating weight she had carried alone since her parents' deaths, the constant, terrifying responsibility of keeping her brother safe, had suddenly been lifted. When the car merged back into the Seoul traffic, Amara looked over at Min-jae. He had already opened his laptop, his sharp jaw set as he returned to the ruthless logistics of running his empire. Yet she noticed the small details now: how he had personally reviewed the school's security roster, how he had ensured David's favorite snacks were waiting in his new dormitory, and how he never once mentioned the staggering cost of the tuition. "Why are you doing all of this?" Amara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It goes far beyond the terms of our contract." Min-jae paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He closed the laptop slowly and turned his piercing dark eyes toward her. The cold, calculating mask he wore for the world seemed to soften, if only for a fraction of an inch. "A contract protects interests, Amara," he said, his low voice vibrating with a quiet, fierce sincerity. "But I told you before, the Kang name protects you, and what matters to you matters to me." Amara looked at his hands, remembering how those same fingers had ruthlessly threatened her uncle, yet had gently signed the papers to secure her brother's future. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a warm, terrifying realization washing over her. The emotional restraint she had fought so hard to maintain was completely crumbling. She wasn't just grateful to the dangerous man sitting beside her. Beneath his icy armor lay a soul fiercely protective and deeply good, and she was completely, irrevocably falling for him. The rain fell in blinding sheets over the narrow streets of Mapogu, blurring the neon signs of the late-night shops. Amara pulled her tailored coat tighter around her shoulders as she hurried toward her parked car, having just wrapped up a brief meeting with her university advisor. The quiet security guards Min-jae had assigned to her were supposed to be waiting at the entrance of the parking structure. But as she stepped into the concrete shadows, a suffocating silence gripped the air. Then she saw them. Two of her guards slumped against the wall, unconscious. Before she could scream, the screech of tires echoed through the garage. A dark van intercepted her path, its sliding door throwing open to reveal three masked men. They lunged for her, their eyes cold and calculating. They expected a helpless waitress. They expected a fragile bargaining chip. But they didn't know Amara Okafor. Years of surviving the harshest trials on her own had forged an unyielding resilience beneath her gentle exterior. As the first attacker grabbed her arm, Amara didn't panic. She channeled her fear into raw adrenaline. Driving her low heel sharply down onto his instep, she shattered his footing. He groaned, loosening his grip, and Amara instantly swung her heavy leather handbag, striking the second man square across the face with the heavy metal clasp. "Grab her, you fools!" a voice barked from the van. Amara spun around, darting toward the exit, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. She managed to break past the first perimeter, her thick curls spilling from her elegant bun as she fought for her life. When a third man intercepted her, she ducked beneath his wild swing and drove a sharp elbow straight into his solar plexus, leaving him gasping for air. She was fierce, stubborn, and refusing to break. But the odds were entirely against her. A heavy, chemical-soaked cloth suddenly clamped over her nose and mouth from behind. Amara thrashed wildly, kicking backward and tearing at the hands that held her, her dark eyes flashing with a final, desperate defiance. But the sweet, sickening fumes of chloroform quickly invaded her lungs. The concrete floor swam beneath her, and her limbs grew impossibly heavy. As consciousness slipped away, the rival syndicate lieutenant stepped into her blurring field of vision, looking down at her with a sinister smirk. He dragged her limp body into the back of the van, sliding the door shut with a heavy thud. They had her. But as the van sped away into the stormy night, they had no idea that they hadn't just captured a wife. They had unleashed the full, unmitified wrath of Kang Min-jae. The phone on Min-jae's mahogany desk vibrated, a low hum that instantly shattered the quiet of his office. He picked it up, expecting a routine security check. Instead, the breathless, blood-choked voice of his lead operative filled the line. "Sir, an ambush in Mapogu. They took the lady." In that single devastating second, the elegant restaurant owner vanished. The calculated, patient businessman died. The air in the room dropped to a sub-zero chill as Kang Min-jae stood up, his piercing dark eyes flashing with a terrifying, unmitigated violence. He didn't yell. He didn't smash his desk. Instead, he simply buttoned his charcoal suit jacket. His movements so calm they were unnatural. But his jaw was set so tight it looked carved from stone. "Assemble, everyone," Min-jae said, his voice a low, gravelly promise of death. "We are burning the city down." Within 30 minutes, the entire underground network of Seoul felt the tremors of his wrath. Min-jae didn't operate from the shadows anymore. He tore through the city like a localized hurricane. His armored motorcade intercepted rival operations in broad daylight. He personally walked into the VIP lounges of corrupt officials and underground casinos, his presence alone causing armed men to drop to their knees in terror. He didn't ask questions. He demanded coordinates. When a high-ranking lieutenant from the rival syndicate hesitated to speak, Min-jae didn't offer a strategic compromise. He stepped forward, gripped the man's collar with a terrifying strength, and slammed him onto a glass table, glass shattering like ice. "Where is she?" Min-jae whispered, his face inches from the bleeding man. "Every second you waste is a block of your territory I burn. Choose wisely." The underworld was paralyzed. They had thought Amara was a political prop, a foreign girl used as a shield against an arranged marriage. They had miscalculated. Min-jae wasn't fighting for a contract. He was fighting for his life, for the only woman who had ever seen past his armor and treated him with genuine warmth. By 4 a.m., under a torrential downpour, the rival lieutenant cracked, sobbing as he spat out an address, an abandoned shipyard on the edge of the Han River. Min-jae released him, letting the man drop to the floor. He wiped a stray drop of blood from his cheek with a silk handkerchief, his eyes fixed on the distant, stormy horizon. He had spent years restraining his worst impulses, operating on strategy and logic. But they had taken Amara. They had touched his wife. As his men loaded their weapons behind him, the king of Seoul's underworld stepped back into the rain, ready to show the world exactly what happens when you try to take his queen. The echo of the final gunshot died out against the rusted steel of the shipyard, replaced by the steady roar of the Han River. Amara stood amidst the debris, a heavy metal pipe still gripped tightly in her bruised hand. Beside her, Min-jae lowered his weapon, his chest heaving, his immaculate charcoal suit torn and stained with grease and rival blood. Together, they had broken the ambush, from the inside out. Her unyielding resilience had bought the seconds he needed to breach the perimeter. The rival syndicate was shattered, their leverage completely dismantled. Within hours, Min-jae's legal team had secured a permanent, ironclad injunction, freezing her greedy relatives out of the inheritance forever. David was safe. The war was won. Late that night, the heavy silence of the Hanam-dong penthouse welcomed them back. The panoramic view of the Seoul skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass, but neither of them looked at the city. Amara stood in the center of the marble living room, her breath catching as Min-jae walked over to his sleek mahogany desk. He didn't pour a drink. He didn't check his encrypted phone. Instead, he picked up the crisp white document they had signed under the ticking clock days ago. Their marriage contract. With agonizing slowness, his piercing dark eyes locked onto hers. His large hands gripped the edges of the paper, and with a decisive, sharp rip, he tore it down the center. He tossed the pieces onto the desk like useless confetti. Min-jae, Amara whispered, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. The contract. We still had months left. Min-jae stepped into her space, the lethal aura of the underworld king completely melting away, leaving only the raw, exposed vulnerability of a man in love. He reached out, his long fingers gently cupping her jaw, his thumb tracing the soft skin of her deep brown cheek. I don't want a contract holding you to me, Amara, he murmured, his low voice vibrating with a fierce, quiet intensity. The truth is, there never was a timeline. I didn't stand up in that restaurant because of a business arrangement. I stood up because I couldn't bear the thought of anyone else answering your cry. Amara's eyes widened, a tear slipping down her cheek. What do you mean? I've watched you for months, Min-jae confessed, a soft, rare smile breaking through his emotional restraint. Long before that 24-hour clock ever started, I watched how you treated everyone with kindness, how fiercely loyal you were, how you carried the weight of the world without breaking. I fell for you in the quiet, ordinary moments, Amara. He slipped the strategic platinum band off his finger and took her hand, his gaze burning into hers. The inheritance is yours. David is secure. You are entirely free to walk out that door. But I am asking you to stay, not as my contract partner, but as my wife. Forever. Looking into his eyes, Amara realized her fortress was finally built. She smiled, leaning into his touch. I'm not going anywhere.